Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour as I dive into stress and burnout. It's not a far jump for me these days right now. So I want to talk about this topic because it is so important, and you might be hearing these things and saying like, oh, I'm so stressed. And sometimes it can become a bit of a badge of honor, and pay attention to how you talk about, life. And I catch myself, I'm trying to switch my language from, oh, I'm so busy or I'm so stressed to my life is full, or yes, I have a lot going on, and trying to keep that language more towards the positive a little bit, because I think we can get in that mindset of just like the gloom and doom of it. Stress really has been a large topic. When the pandemic was here, there was actually an APA report that talked about like stress and loneliness and all of these things. And what I am seeing is that it didn't just go away, right? So there was this, period of deep uncertainty and real challenges with, we don't know what's going on in the world, and is everyone safe, and people aren't safe. And so, we're in this kind of contained moment. And then, as, time went on, people would talk about getting back to normal or a new normal. And I find it really interesting because I think we had this moment of like pause, stop, and real stress and uncertainty. And then this like, oh, well, let's get back to normal kind of vibe. And I think now that we're a couple of years past that, what we're seeing in life and the workplace, that there's a residual effect. There is like this kind of how do I say this? I guess residual effect is the best way, but I am hearing more and more people talk about these things in ways that they hadn't before. And I think there might have been this idea like, oh, well, we'll get back to normal. And then people are like, oh, my body, my nervous system is still reactive. And what's that from? And maybe during the pause, we were able to see a little bit more about the nervous system and how it reacts, and the rest and digest. And I'll get into all of that during this show. But that's why I think it is really important to continue to talk about these things. I like a definition of stress that I heard years ago, is that stress is when we feel that we don't have the necessary resources to meet the demand that we're faced with. So again, stress is what we feel, or when we feel that we don't have the necessary resources to meet the demand we're faced with. And think about that, because that's not in every situation, right? So there could be a situation where it's like, yep, I've got this, I know exactly what to do. And then, that might tip the more that we have on that, the demand or the resources. Because if we're giving our resources to one area and then we have one more demand come in, it's like, I can't handle that. So I think that I like thinking of it that way, because it feels less personal versus like, oh, I'm stressed or I can't handle my stress. But it's just more like, do I have the resources to meet the demand that I'm faced with? And if I don't, how can I start getting those resources? Is that from an internal response, or is that from something outside of me? And we will talk about, kind of completing the stress cycle. But I want you to just stay open to this idea that I'm not asking you to add one more thing to your already busy day. I really do want the things that we're talking about to give some language or some support to whatever you're facing right now. So hopefully this can be a resource for you to meet the demands that you're faced with today. And, you know, I kind of started out with a little joke about the stress in my life right now, and it's good stress. And so stress can also be good. It's not all negative. And the good stress that I'm faced with is I have 3 talks next week, which is amazing because I really want to be a professional speaker. Well, I am a professional speaker, but I want that to be more of my, income and time. And so having these 3 talks is wildly exciting. And I'm noticing that level of stress and wanting to make sure that everything is right and that I have the necessary resources. So, to that end, what I am trying to do is limit the things that I know that actually increase my stress or the feelings of stress. So, I have a couple months ago switched from coffee to black tea. Yes, black tea still has some caffeine in it, but I don't process it the same way. So, I don't have that feeling of agitation. So, sometimes those things that we're taking in are actually kind of increasing those feelings of that stress response. So coffee, and I don't drink a lot these days, but I have cut that out. So, I am I'm like no drinks until after these talks because I know that when I have drinks, even like 1 or 2, I don't sleep well at night. And I did hear this recently that someone they said, and I don't remember the person, but they said you can either drink or you can sleep at a certain age. And I guess I am at that age. So sleep helps me modify or manage my stress. So I have taken those things out. So, it's also about kind of being aware of what's happening and how can you meet those things. And then using my tools. As my dear friend Laura says, sometimes she forgets to remember, and sometimes I forget to remember to use my tools as well. I talk about them here all the time, and yet when you're in the thick of it, it can be really hard to say a pause and like go like, okay, what do I actually need right now? So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about stress. I'm going to talk about burnout. I'm going to talk about, ways to meet stress and talking about, good stress and bad stress and those types of things. And I want you to think about maybe an area that you are experiencing stress, and maybe there's something in here in this episode today that will help you meet that stress with a little bit more ease. And I will say this, I probably said this before, but it bears repeating. The way that I found, it was already here, meditation and mindfulness was through the stress I was experiencing in grad school. So again, I went to grad school later in life, and that first year I picked up all of my bad habits in response to stress, right? So I wasn't being mindfully aware of like what might help my stress. It was just that knee-jerk reaction, and I was reaching for more alcohol, more sugar, less exercise, all the things that I know that help my stress, but my brain kind of short-circuited and went back to all of the old ways. And so when my friend Heather had said something about, would you try meditation? And I was all about it. So that's how I went in and found my way into this topic that is now central to my life. Meditation and mindfulness is something that I come back to, and that I say all roads lead to for me in the topics of life that I talk about, because these are tools that are thousands of years showing their support, and there's research, and I'll get into that. Anyway, so stress, it did not take away my stress of grad school, I am sorry to admit, but it did help me meet that stress. And that's what I'm hoping for you in these topics that we're talking about today. So again, if you think about the definition of stress, when we don't have the necessary resources to meet the demand that we're faced with, um, And what are sources of stress? Well, I mean, kind of pick an area. It is so common, and we are connected in today's 24/7 world, right? So we have phones, we have computers, we have ways to be contacted at all hours of the day. We can jump online and find our stress through news outlets at any point of the day. It's not just the 5 o'clock news or whenever news used to just be on the 1 or 2 hours. We can find that at any point. For those of us like myself who like to dip into comments, I know it's not healthy, but I'll dip into comments of a post that I'm reading or looking at, and you can find a lot of stress there and a lot of people reacting and acting out of their stress. So common sources, it could be work, it could be, again, resources. Do you have the resources to do what you need in life? Do you have, and that can be any resource. That can be time, finances, support, um, uh, let's see, all of them. So common sources of stress. So financial, health, do you have childcare if you have children? Do you have enough money to pay rent? And those are big and real things. So I am not minimizing that. And these are really common sources of stress. So not only are we constantly able to access, information, and maybe sometimes that information isn't super supportive for mental health. My husband calls it doom scrolling. So I'll say, oh, what are you doing? He's like, oh, doom scrolling. And so you just kind of get in that trance of just looking at all the crap that's going on all around the world. And again, there are real issues in the world today. I am not minimizing that, but what as an individual in this today's world that is 24/7 and a lot of really difficult things happening. So how do you as an individual meet that? Again, we can't take away, we can't control, we can't make other things happen, but how do we meet that, at least for our own nervous system, so that we have, again, that response, right? So as I was saying with grad school, I had that knee-jerk reaction of just going to all my previous habits of meeting stress. And what mindfulness and meditation has done is it's given that pause so that I can actually respond differently to the stress. Again, it doesn't take away the stress. And as I mentioned, there is good stress and bad stress. And good stress, we need a level of stress. There's kind of this stress continuum. So, if you're on the low side, that's fine. But to get to peak performance, you almost need to be like right in the middle or just over into that stress level, right? So there's a healthy tension, there's peak performance. What happens is we start going into the imbalance and breakdown. So that's if stress is too high, too continuous. And so as a positive influence, again, stress can compel us to action. It can bring us to the peak performance zone and bring a sense of excitement and exhilaration in our lives. And you might even start to play around and notice, do I gravitate towards stress because being into relaxation or rest is unfamiliar? And that happens as well. As a negative influence, stress can result in fatigue, anxiety, feelings of helplessness. And if this response persists over time, or results from like a sudden significant change, it can lead to health problems. And so that's when we get into chronic stress and burnout. And so again, healthy tension would be things like stimulating challenges and demands that motivate you to improve your performance and efficiency. They have a benefit of increasing joy and excitement in your life. There's actually some research that talks about doing not kind of, why do I say that? But doing stressful activities while on a first date can actually, bring that togetherness. I'm not talking like, go do your taxes together. That would be a really weird first date. But things like, roller coasters or, any of these like rope course challenges, things like that. So it can actually, bring that together. And I'll have to look up the research, but because I do remember them talking about that, but I can't quote it off the top of my head. So something to think about as well. In your peak performance zone, again, in order to reach your personal best, like let's say that would be on like the day of an exam, or maybe you're participating in an athletic event, some performance or personal challenge. You need to be well prepared physically and mentally and emotionally. And that foundation then will allow you to access that extra burst of energy and focus to achieve peak performance. So again, you're kind of riding that fine line. So for me, as I'm launching this business, as I'm going into my first speaking engagements in 2024, what I'm needing for my peak performance would be to be well prepared physically, mentally, and emotionally. So that means using my tools, right? So that means, like I said, I've switched from coffee. I'm not drinking so that I sleep, and that I'm moving my body every day and using my tools like meditation and journaling. So, you're trying to bolster that. So when you're all the way into imbalance and you're into deep stress, it's really it's not impossible, but it can be really hard to then go like, oh, well, what tools can I use to help me in this moment? And again, it is possible, but that's why we talk about it now, or you think about what supports you now. And so that when you are in a stress moment, you can have that awareness of like, what do you need to support yourself? That could be asking for extra help from others. It could be saying no to things that you'd normally say yes to, just so you can have those resources at your disposal to meet the stress. And then imbalance, that's when stress is like building and there's a protective function in the body and mind. They can get compromised. So that could be like irritability, aches and pains, sleep issues, or a decline in performance. And so that would be as you're moving away from peak performance and into imbalance and breakdown. Breakdown is stress left unchecked. Symptoms do worsen, causing forgetfulness, severe physical complaints, illness, feelings of anxiety, panic, or depression. And so that's when you're going into that breakdown mode. And so when you have the stress response, and you have that kind of flight or fight response, fight, flight, or flee. And then so that is that, your body is actually responding to that. There's a great book called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers, because in today's world, we don't have, many of us do not have the physical stress, right? Where, if you think about like a National Geographic show or something like that, and you see a lion that starts chasing a zebra, and the zebra like runs, and let's say it gets away. It always depends on who, and maybe, I don't know, well, like what the episode's focused on, because if they've been focusing on the lions, of course I want them to get that because they have to feed their babies. But if I'm looking at the zebra, I'm like, get away. And so in this book, actually, they talk about why zebras don't have ulcers, which is, they have that stress response. They're being chased, they might be eaten, and so, but when they get away and like the camera pans to them, they will often be found grazing, and they'll do like a full body shake. My dogs do this too. My dog Hank just ran into something the other day, and then I just noticed, and they did a full body shake and kind of went about his day. What we don't do as humans is like when we're in this, kind of imbalance going towards breakdown, we stay up here in our heads, right? We're like, oh my gosh, and the worry and these brains of ours, we can have fears for the future. We can ruminate on the past, and our brains give us so much. So much appreciation for the brain, and something to notice that when we're in this kind of stress cycle, that we can really go into imbalance because it stays in our brain and we're not shaking it off, like literally or figuratively. And so, again, if you're starting to notice the stress coming onto your life, there are ways that are research proven to help complete that stress cycle. And I'll get into that in just a minute here. So, just wanting to make sure that I am on track. So, early signs of stress, again, that could be that tension. You might notice tension or tightness in the jaw. You might have difficulty sleeping. So, start paying attention to what the signs are that you are actually experiencing in stress. Yes, there are kind of similar threads, but we are, as you know, all different, and so it could produce or show up differently for you. And once you know how it's showing up, that's by checking in with the body and going like, oh, I will often notice that I hold a lot of tension in my jaw or and I'll be like, oh my gosh, like that, like I didn't even know that I was clenching. Or I don't know if you've ever, tried like a yoga class or something, like where it's like, oh, the instruction is to drop your shoulders away from your ears. And I'm like, and I can almost feel them like floating up, like when I've now been paying attention to when I'm in stress, I'm like, oh my God, where are my shoulders going? Okay, relax the shoulders. And then before I know it, they'll start lifting back up. So that is a self-awareness piece. And again, when you recognize the signs, then you can make those choices. We can't make stress go away, but we can have that ability to pause and to respond a little differently. So I want to talk a little bit more about. I was talking about stress. There's also a thing called the stress continuum model, and I'll put a link up for a really good form that I'm looking at right now. But it uses those, again, the green, yellow, orange, and red. And what's cool about this is once you are aware of the stress continuum and where you might fall in it, you can start saying to people like, hey, I'm in the yellow zone, I really need help. Or, oh my gosh, I'm all the way over into red and I really need support. So I'm just going to read a couple things so maybe you can find yourself on the stress continuum as I'm talking. So if you're on the green, you're ready. It is, optimally functioning, adaptive growth, there's wellness. Someone in this area is at their best, well-trained, prepared, physically, mentally, and spiritually fit, mission focused, motivated, calm and steady, having fun, and behaving ethically. So that is like if you're in the green and everything's just flowing and you're doing it. Reacting in this area of being kind of in the yellow would be mild or transient distress or impairment, so it always goes away. There's kind of low risk here. It could be any stressor that causes this. But you might notice, so again, features, it might be feeling irritable or anxious, or down, lack of motivation, loss of focus, difficulty sleeping, muscle tension, or other physical changes, and you're just not having fun. So that's kind of in that yellow. When you're going into orange, that's a more severe, persistent distress or impairment. It leaves a scar, and it's higher risk. Causes could be threat to life, loss, moral injury, wear and tear. And the features here would be loss of control, panic, rage, or depression, no longer feeling like your normal self, excessive guilt, shame, or blame, and, sometimes even some misconduct here. And again, I'll post this, but this is from the PTSD .va.gov, and going into the red zone would be maybe something, a clinical mental disorder, unhealed stress, injury causing impairment. So that would be things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance use disorder. The features would be persistent and worsen over time, and severe distress or social and occupational impairment. So it's not for nothing, and it's not a small thing. Another stress continuum that I've used when I teach this is, and it talks about the green is thriving, the yellow is surviving, orange would be overwhelmed, and red is burnt out / in crisis. So, you kind of like find yourself in there. And so you could actually, think about things like in the past year, where would you say you've spent most of your time on the stress continuum? So once you have that link, or you can look up stress continuum, and there's lots of resources, but you could take time and reflect, like, where have you spent most of your time here? And then what characteristic do you notice when you're in this zone? Like, what are you noticing in the body? And another activity is you could list your biggest stressors, because sometimes, there's a quote that I see, and I don't know who to attribute it, but I like it. It's, naming it to tame it, right? So you name something, and then that starts allowing you to see it versus just, again, reacting to that. So, you might list your biggest stressors, and maybe even writing them down helps you just to notice and can give you that plan of action. Or it might help you remember to use your tools, or reach out to people. Another thing that is super helpful for me is this idea of window of tolerance. Because for myself, I know that I might have a situation, I'm like, well, I'm not handling it very well, or so and so's handling it better than I am. And then that becomes that kind of judgment and comparison, which is never helpful. What is the quote? Comparison is the thief of joy. But when you are doing that comparison, then you're not really responding to your own life. And so something to think about is that, when you're in the window of tolerance, there's feelings of safety and comfort. There's actually an ability to navigate daily stressors with more ease. There's an ability to focus. Muscles are relaxed. There's a present moment awareness, and you're in effective communication. So even picturing right now a window. So if you are in this window that we're calling tolerance, you're kind of in that zone. You are like able to feel connected and comfort. Again, this idea that you're able to navigate daily stressors with more ease. Stress doesn't go away. And you're able to focus. So once you start kind of going out of your window of tolerance, so if you think about going above your window, so that would be hyper arousal. So that's the fight, flight stress response. So that concentration would be difficult. You'd have an increase in frustration, difficulty breathing, muscle tension, and you could be on edge. So like if you've ever just been like, oh, I'm just on edge, I don't know why, or you're more frustrated easily than normal. That is meaning that your body is in hyper arousal. So that would mean you're outside of that window of tolerance, and you're hyper arousal. And so then hypo arousal, that's the freeze stress response. Man, that is what I'm real familiar with. So the freeze stress response would be a loss of body awareness, emotional detachment, blanking out, fatigue, being numb, having low energy. And when you're in that hypoarousal, that can just be, like, I don't want to do anything. And so that's, also out of the window of tolerance, but this is your body reacting in different ways, right? So hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So maybe paying attention when you're out of the window of tolerance. Do you go to one or the other? And maybe it might be situationally or stressor dependent, right? Because I know that I've also experienced hyperarousal with increased in frustration and feeling on edge, and definitely muscle tension. So paying attention again. So this is information for you to start looking at the areas in your life where stress is arising, that, and how you respond to it. So stress and trauma actually begin to close the window. So I'm picturing like a window with shutters. And it's like outside of the window of tolerance, it might be challenging to stay calm and make supportive decisions. So evidence-based coping strategies help to keep the window open, right? Help you keep you in that window of tolerance. That would be mindfulness, movement, journaling, dancing, deep breaths, and drawing. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but that is evidence-based. So all that I'm talking to you about, it's not just a fancy ideal. It is shown to support this so that as we understand our bodies and their systems a little bit more, we can meet those things. And again, these things have been around for thousands of years, but we haven't always like kind of made that connection, or at least I hadn't. And so, start paying attention to, what emotions or signals do you notice when you're not in your window of tolerance? You might even pause and be like, am I in my window of tolerance right now? And what would that mean? And maybe, maybe you're so far out the window, you haven't seen it in a while. I know I've been there as well. And are there situations where you experience hyperarousal versus hypoarousal? And again, hyper is like up, and I actually picture it above the window, and then hypo is like lower. That's that freeze response. I picture and in my workbooks that I put together, I have it that way. Just that's the way my mind works. And so then also, do you have coping strategies right now that you use to move yourself back into a window of tolerance? And there are, again, as I had mentioned, coping strategies that I had before, that were deeply ingrained, were not optimal. They weren't actually helping my stress. And so, thinking about your own stress and thinking about how you kind of meet that stress. There are ways, and I'm not going to say healthy and unhealthy because I don't like that. I don't like, putting a judgment, but noticing how you feel. I have noticed now that I am older, that drinking doesn't agree with me in the same way that it used to. And maybe it never did, but I was able to, like, tell that, my poor little body to shh and keep going. But now, my body does give me immediate feedback in the form of no sleep. And so, although, when I was in that kind of knee-jerk reaction, I mean, in going to grad school, drinking increased because I was like, "Well, what do? You go home, you have a drink." And yeah, not everybody, but that, my brain went there. And also more sugar, and sugar increases and also increases my kind of agitation, and also interrupts my sleep. So that's something else I've paid attention to. And so it's noticing. And again, when I say noticing, and I say this to myself all the time, so I'm going to just keep saying it to y'all too, is that when you notice, if you could notice without judgment, if you could just simply go like, oh, interesting, I'm doing that again, which then gives you more space. Because if you notice and you're like, why do I keep doing this? This is not helpful. I know this is not helpful. I, you know, well, that's probably going to increase your stress, but you can pay attention to that as well. I know that it does for me. So if you can pay attention, if you can notice what you are already doing, so notice those situations. How do you respond? What do you reach for? And as you're reaching for it, maybe you continue to reach for it, but then you pay attention. How do I feel after? Is this how I want to feel? Is this supportive? And so, like, it's all about like taking care of this container and this life experience that you have, because and it's an experiment, right? Because it's not a cookie cutter. I could say these are the things that have helped me. And one of my friends, well, you've met her a couple times now, Heather. She, as her stress goes up, her coffee intake goes up, and she loves her cup of coffee in the morning. But she has noticed that, oh my gosh, I'm reaching for coffee more. I'm really stressed, and also the coffee is agitating and not helping her stress. So just start paying attention again, without judgment, with some friendliness and curiosity, bringing that awareness. And then also, if we go back to that, ACE that I talked about, it, you can apply it to all the situations. So, you're bringing awareness, and then you bring curiosity. Where do you feel this in your body? What situations are they coming up in? And then explore the stories that you have. So if it is about a stressful situation, what are the stories that you're telling yourself about that situation? Is it true? And this is Byron Katie's work, but is it true? And then you can say, is it really true? Is it really, really true? But it it helps to frame and do that pause so that you can start noticing what's supportive, what's not supportive. How do I, meet these situations a little differently? So paying attention to that. So that's an image that I like. And when you are in the stress cycle, and I've been kind of pointing this, but I'm going to actually name it. So there is where you're unconscious and unaware. So you're in it and you're just like going, going, going. This might be where you are today, and this conversation might move you over to the other side, which would be more conscious and aware. So again, there's external events, potential stressors, threats. These could be physical, social, and environmental. And your response in the stress cycle can be unconscious and aware or conscious and aware. And you want to bring it into awareness again, because then you can have adaptive responses. And you can choose things that actually support you. When you're in unconscious and unaware, again, that could be that you're, feeling things, you're on automatic pilot, you might have aches and pains, just decrease in immune function, the coping methods, overeating, overworking, denial, isolation, substance misuse, going into physical breakdown. That could be psychological exhaustion or burnout. And then even leading to, and this, again, evidence-based, leading to chronic disease. So heart disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, dementia, depression, anxiety, and GI tract issues. So again, those are kind of like if it's going unchecked in your body, and that leads back to that stress continuum, right? So if you're constantly in the orange red and, there's not really a pause or an awareness, chances are you're going to be responding in kind of an orange red way, which would be in the unconscious and unaware. And then conscious and aware, again, mindful awareness. You can pause, you can check in with your body sensations, the thoughts you're having, the emotions, and then you can respond from there. So the health behaviors would be choosing to move, doing some conscious breath, connection, laughter, affection, express emotions, and journal. So that is adaptive health behaviors, and those are how to complete the stress cycle. And I'll pause and go over those a little bit in more detail. So when you're calm and regulated, that would be your nervous system's calm, your heart rate is slower, blood pressure lower, you have better digestion. And then in health and well-being, there's increased oxytocin, stronger immune system, better relationships, and resilience. So and I mean, in better relationships, if you think about, how you might be responding in the stress continuum model, right? Where it's, there's high frustration, there's, kind of this agitation, that doesn't lead to great communication. And we talked about that in, I don't remember what episode, communication. I think it was. Anyways, we have talked about mindful communication, but when you are in this stress mode, it is really difficult to have good communication, which, or even responses to the people in your life. And it might not have anything to do with them. It could be, within you and just your stress response. And so again, paying attention to physical sensations that you notice in your body when you are experiencing stress. What health behaviors do you do when you're stressed? And that could be non-adaptive or adaptive. So again, paying attention, and one is not better than the other. It is just a reaction versus a response until that response, then becomes your reaction, like your go-to. But as I said at the beginning, you might forget, as I do often, forget to remember to use your tools. And when I get off track, I'll just say this as an aside, when I get off track and this happened a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I was feeling real stressed, and my husband noticed, and he said, "Have you been outside today?" Which is one of these, kind of complete the stress cycle of being in nature and moving. And he actually was like, "You need to go for a walk." And and I kind of was grumbling. I'm like, "I have so much to do. I don't have time to go for a walk." Blah, blah, blah. And guess what? It's so funny and kind of annoying that it works. These tools actually work. So again, not judging the health behaviors that you go to, but just noticing, what do you practice? What do you reach for? And you can think of like an activity that you might like to try and manage the stress in your life. But again, I don't want this to be about adding more to your to-do list, because that is stressful. As I go into these, kind of complete the stress cycle thing, there is a woman, it's a new book out in 2023 called Real Self-Care, a transformative program for redefining wellness. And then in parentheses on the book, it says crystals, cleanses, and bubble baths not included. But I heard her speaking on a podcast the other day, and this is Dr. Pooja Lakshma, Lakshmin, Lakshman. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that, but I know it's Dr. Pooja. But they were talking about on this podcast that yes, there's nothing wrong with bubble baths. There's nothing wrong with doing things like yoga, but paying attention to what the intention is that you have going into those things, right? So if it is this like manic checklist and like, okay, I've meditated, but you're actually not paying attention to what's going on in your body, then you're not going to get the benefits, because there are real benefits to yoga or moving your body. And if you are doing it, in a way, the description, or what she had said about that in the podcast was, if all you're worried about in yoga is like the pose that you're in and, comparing yourself to other people, and if you're wearing the right things, then you're going to be actually increasing your stress. But if you're there and you're like, okay, this is my time for me. And so, and you're like actually like relaxing the body and it feels good in your body. So that's why it's important to pay attention, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. And so what's your intention behind it? And again, if you just go through a checklist because someone told you this is what you have to do, you could try that at the beginning, right? So as I list out how to complete the stress cycle, you can try that at the beginning and then pay attention to what is actually supportive. Don't just add all of these things to your list, because that's not going to help you, unfortunately. And so what I liked about, this real self-care, they talk about, she talks about values and how actually start defining your values and then moving that as your self-care needle. Because again, depending on how you're going into these practices can influence whether it's increasing the stress or not really helping it, or if it is. Another thing to think about is paying attention to if you are in that hyper arousal or hypo arousal, because how you respond to those are different. Hypo arousal, again, very familiar with that state. Movement and doing something out, like getting the body going, is actually the antidote to that. If you are in hyper arousal, sometimes movement is the antidote to that, dancing it out and shaking, kind of moving the body like the zebra does, right? To literally shake off that stress. However, it could be you need to journal, go inward, find some calm to help balance that. So again, all of these things, it is important to pay attention to what is going on in your world. So let me talk to you about the 10 ways to complete the stress cycle. This is in a book called Burnout. I've talked about it before. Love these ladies, the Nagasas. Oh man, I know how to say this. Nagasaki. Anyways, words today, apparently. Sisters. I keep trying to say it. Anyways, they are sisters who wrote this book, and I will put it in the link so you can find it. Anyway, so maybe maybe I need to practice what I teach here. I'll be paying attention to that when I get off the call today. So 10 ways to complete the stress cycle. Practice mindfulness. Again, that is, mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So bringing mindfulness to, the stress in your life and how you're responding to it. I've been talking about that a lot. It can also be, a meditation practice that feels supportive in that moment. Moving the body. Again, shaking and dancing. You could turn on, if it's like, oh, I don't know what to do to move the body, or I don't want to go to yoga. That doesn't feel good. Turn on a song that you like and dance and just shake your body, move it in whatever way, have a kitchen dance party, but just move. And believe me, when I am in hypoarousal, the last thing I want to do is move. And therefore, the support that Charlie gave me by saying, stop, go for a walk. Maybe you need, to ask someone in your life to tell you to go move your body. Breath work, breathing is really supportive. There's a practice that I'll lead at the end here, but it's, called soft belly breathing. And that comes from James Gordon. And he wrote a book called The Transformation and Discovering Wholeness and Healing After Trauma. And again, research-based, looking at these mindfulness practices and specifically this soft belly breathing. Positive social interactions. So you can forget to remember to be around those people. And I just read something or saw it on a reel. James Clear. He was talking about he and his friend, kind of research shows that when you are in stress or when you are in distress, really it only takes 8 minutes of a positive social interaction. And if you're anything like me, it can be really hard to ask for help or support. And so knowing that it's 8 minutes, it's less difficult for me. And I have a couple friends where, we've agreed that that could be our sign to each other. Do you have 8 minutes? And that means I need you, and the other person most likely has 8 minutes. So again, positive social interactions, it can be really hard to reach out. I am not minimizing that in any way, shape, or form. And it is shown to help complete that stress cycle. Laughter. So, watching, whatever makes you laugh. I like watching comedians and just finding a way to laugh. Affection. So that could be with another human or a pet. And so actually, pausing and feeling like a hug. I think it's a 20-second hug. They talk about it in detail what the research shows, or, petting a pet or having that sort of interaction where you're giving and receiving affection is a helpful way to complete the stress cycle. Express your emotions, man. And that can be really difficult to do. Especially if you've been trained or taught that emotions are bad. I don't know if I've ever said this on the show, but years ago, God bless her, Pauline, my mom, put me in a prayer circle to be prayed over for my bad temper. And when I think about that, I'm like, man, it would have been really helpful if I would have been taught to express my emotions rather than try to pray them away. So that's taken me some work to kind of move through, but expressing your emotions. And that doesn't mean that you are like letting your emotions just like cover someone else in a negative way, but you're expressing them. It could be journaling. I have some real angry journal entries when I've felt that, or just noticing them for yourself. And again, allowing yourself the permission that we are here on earth in these human bodies to experience a wide range of emotions. And sometimes we only think that the positive emotions, for whatever reason, are the only emotions that are worth expressing. And again, don't harm yourself or others, but, allow yourself to say like, oh yeah, sadness is here or depression is here. And anger, things like that. So noticing that so you can understand what's happening, maybe noticing it in your body and doing things to meet those. Creative expression. You don't have, you don't have to do something that is award winning or that you're, even going to show to anyone else, but finding a way to be creative. I have been playing with paint. So I do watercolor and I do acrylic. And one day, maybe it was in February, I was feeling just that like oh, like so like anxious and stressed. And I came upstairs and I painted like a little maniac. And I didn't have a plan in place, and I didn't have anything. And an abstract, an interesting abstract came out of it. And I look at it and I'm like, wow, I really like the beauty of that painting. And when I think about the stress that I was in when I did it, yeah, it's interesting. It was a way for me to express what was going on, and I used a creative outlet, which was super helpful. Savoring the good. And this one is can be kind of tricky, I think, especially if you're deep in the thick of it. You can be like, well, there's nothing good. But you might start noticing even the little things. And we talked in a mindfulness episode about informal practice. So for me, sometimes savoring the good is actually like going like, oh wow, I am lucky enough to have running water in my home, and it's hot and it's cold and I can get a drink of water. And so it can be those things that we might not pay attention to. And then once you start paying attention, you're like, hey, that, I actually, that's pretty cool. And so finding those moments, and again, not forcing them, don't do like something that's actually guilt inducing or making you feel worse. But just start paying attention, and start inclining your mind towards the good and seeing like, what can I notice even in, this crappy situation, that is good. Like when Charlie was in the hospital and he had almost died, when I was sitting by his bedside, I was able to lean on my mindfulness and meditation practice. And there was nothing good about the fact that we were in the hospital, but the good that I found was that we had health insurance. Not everyone does. We were able to afford our deductible. Not everyone can. We were able to have life-saving medical intervention. Not everyone does. And so I was able to find the good kind of organically in that situation without demeaning the fear and the worry and the sadness. Because again, you're not just saying like, oh, only these good emotions are good. But once you start inclining your mind, you can find a little equilibrium and, kind of complete that stress cycle. And journaling. There is just so much power. Well, I should say for me, and I've been journaling off and on since I was in grade school, and it's really powerful. What I had to do to form myself for journaling is to say, this is just for me. Don't worry about, spelling errors, or if someone's going to read it, and then, maybe make a plan that if something happens to you, that, someone gets rid of your journals without reading them for you, if you do it that way. And I'm laughing about that because I did look at my journals from my 20s and 30s and thought, yeah, this I don't need. And before my husband and I moved to Reno in 2014, we had a big bonfire, and I burned them, and I feel absolutely good about it. And so now I have my own journaling practice that, because there's something about that pen to paper that really helps, kind of give you perspective. So those are things that are actually, research proven to complete the stress cycle. And I don't want you to just say like, oh, I need to do all 10 of these things today, right now. Because again, moving your body might not be what you need. You might need to breathe, or you might need some positive social interaction versus, which then maybe you'll even get laughter and affection out of that. But you're wanting to pay attention again, that mindful awareness to, here's what's happening in my body, and here's what I need. Here's the medicine that I need to meet that, and to move myself back into the window of tolerance, to, move myself from that, red yellow zone into, or orange red into the green yellow, and so that you can pay attention. So those are all of the things that I think are so important. And, you know, when we're lucky enough, we can take a break from a stressful situation. And it's not always that way, but in whatever situation you are in, taking, a couple of deep breaths, and we're getting close to the end, but so I'll just, we'll just do a soft, it's soft belly breathing. And I do this all of the time. And so what you do is, and you can do this, with your eyes closed or open, or if you're in line or in traffic. And so breathing in through the nose, expanding the belly, and we're often told to suck in the belly, but breathing in through the nose, a deep breath in, expanding the belly, and then exhaling through the mouth through pursed lips. And you can do that audible, and do that a couple of times. You can do it, for 10 minutes if you want, but even 3 to 5 breaths tells your body that you are safe in this moment. It helps your nervous system get the information that in this moment you are safe. And so taking that time, and it's called soft belly breathing because it's a concentrative meditation. So on the inhale you think soft, and on the exhale you think belly. So inhales, think soft, and outhale, belly. So you're telling your body what to do. You're softening your belly, and you're also, kind of concentrating the mind. And you can think of any word, really, like if you want to inhale peace and, inhale, whatever, calm, and exhale peace, play around with it, words that might help you. So that soft belly breathing is a practice that you can do at any point. Also finding your feet. And I do have meditations that are available on my website at ccwithdrt.com. Again, that's ccwithdrt.com. There's free downloadable meditations. I'm also on Insight Timer. So if you have that app, it's a free app with lots of great teachers and resources. And I happen to have a couple meditations on there that I kind of am updating as I go. And so first of all, your action items as we wrap up: identify the areas where you're feeling stress. What do you have control over? What's out of your control? And is there one small thing out of that list of 10 that you could include into your day to help you meet that stress? And again, not out of a have to, but out of a values driven. So again, check out my website for free downloadable meditations and practices, ccwithdrt.com. Folks in Minnesota, you can join me on June 6th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at Align Optimal Wellness in Stillwater for an in-person workshop on mindful aging. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Creating Connection with Dr. T. I am grateful that you chose to spend this time with me today. Please reach out with any questions, comments, or show ideas. And thank you so much for sharing my show. Please join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central, 10 Pacific. And until then, take good care of yourself. Oh, and see you back here on May 1st. I'll be talking to Comadre Cristal about loving your now. So thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss, grief, and aging if we're lucky. Let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.